It was late 2017 and this is before I ever knew anything about competitive bodybuilding or Mr. Olympia. I lifted weights since I was a kid. I always loved that, but my heroes were movie stars like Van Damme or Arnold. Even though I knew Arnold was a bodybuilder, I didn't know what that meant. I never watched anything with him outside of Hollywood movies. I also knew about Ronnie Coleman, who popped up in my feed from time to time. By the way he looked in those training videos, I always thought he was a powerlifter. I think it was 2017 already, but before the Olympia, I had the curiosity to search for the all-time Mr. Olympia winners. I was shocked that Ronnie was a bodybuilder and even the one holding the record. I also noticed that there was a running record in the present day at the time with a guy named Phil Heath, who had won the previous 6 editions. But my curiosity stopped there for the moment. And then by the end of the year, a video with the 2017 Mr. Olympia review popped up in my feed. It was actually right after the show. I watched that and with my untrained eye, I couldn't understand why there was even an argument for anyone else other than Big Ramy to win. What my untrained eye saw was a huge guy with a huge chest that lost to a smaller guy with a smaller chest. Yep, having a big chest was the #1 factor for me back then. After that, a fire sparked inside of me and I was hooked. Bodybuilding became the main content I would consume in my free time. I watched everything. I watched every video posted by Nick's Strength and Power and the Tominator. Later, Ivan Bodybuilding, Mark's Max Muscle and others. Show reviews, comparisons, full shows, history records, which eventually led to me starting my own channel in the summer of 2020. Enough with the history lesson. Today I want to go back to this show and review it. This is a rather underrated show. In third, we had William Bonac at his absolute best. In second, we had Big Ramy at arguably his best ever. And in first, Phil Heath, who won his 7th and last Olympia title, being as well at his all-time best, aside from the midsection which arguably looked his worst at this show. So we are going to review the top 3 in all the mandatory poses as usual. Front double biceps. It's not difficult to see that Phil Heath is dead last in this pose. He had the most detailed guns indeed, but the midsection and also the execution ruined the pose for him. It's pretty obvious from the body language that he's not comfortable in this pose here. Big Ramy versus William is hard to judge here. Big Ramy is just too damn big and he also has a great X-frame. What he's lacking is the details the other two have. Big Ramy was dry in 2017, but he didn't possess the muscle separation he had in 2020, for example, and this hurts him here against these two. William might just win this pose overall because despite being the smallest and having the worst structure, he has the least amount of flaws and he executes this pose the best way for his structure, so he gets a point for that as well. The front lat spread is a no-brainer. Big Ramy smokes both Phil and William. Big Ramy is probably the widest bodybuilder I've ever seen, while both Phil and William have narrow clavicles. Now, between Phil and William, I think William is better, mainly because of the midsection issues with Phil, which are quite distracting. So after the first 2 poses, Phil finished 3rd in both of them, which already begs the question if Phil really deserved to win this show. Side chest pose, and there you have it. This is the Phil Heath we all know and love. Now, I've made the Phil versus Big Ramy comparison on my Blitz Matchups channel, and if you didn't know about this second channel of mine, make sure to pause this video and check it out. I post daily comparisons with fast analysis in 1 minute or so, and it becomes more and more popular every day. Find the link in the description. So I noticed that some of you consider Big Ramy better than Phil here, and I don't necessarily disagree. I mean, Big Ramy is a powerhouse in this pose, but at this particular show, I really think Phil edged him out. Upper body, it shouldn't even be a question. Big Ramy's only argument can be the chest, but Phil's chest was popping like crazy this year. And then he annihilates Big Ramy with those arms and shoulders. And also downstairs, I believe Phil does really well against Big Ramy here. It's close indeed, but I have Phil winning, Big Ramy a close second, and William a distant third in this pose. He doesn't look bad at all, but Phil and Big Ramy are just one level beyond. Back double biceps, and Ramy was moved to the middle, which for sure did hurt Phil here. Man, looking at Ramy's back, I miss those times when he had one of the best backs in the world. However, as good as his back looked here, Phil and William are even better. Yes, Ramy's size could compensate, but I still have him in third here, a close third, which is big against Phil and William. As for William, for the upper body, I think he really has a strong case to beat Phil Heath here. His lower lats insert nearly the glutes, which is absolutely nuts. I believe Phil has the upper hand against William when we factor in the lower body, especially the hamstrings. William Bonac has a very complete lower body, but Phil's hams are simply the best ever here in 2017. Overall, it could go to William, but I would have Phil just winning. In the back lat spread, William still looks great, but he's third in my eyes. His back is even smaller than Phil's, but Phil has the craziest details you'll ever see in this pose. However, Big Ramy's back looks twice the size of Phil's. This is the reason he beats William. The size difference is just too much that he almost defeats Phil too. I don't think even Ronnie or Dorian had such a big and wide back, but Big Ramy lacks the density and the details. It's a toss-up between him and Phil here, but I would still have Phil winning. So after finishing last in the first two poses, Phil won the following three poses. However, all three were very closely contested by both Big Ramy and William, whereas Phil was a distant third in the first two. The side triceps is a pose that could go to any of these three. This pose won't decide this comparison in a certain direction because it's so close, but I would still give you my opinion on first, second and third. Now, if Phil's waist was a little bit more in control, he would be the winner hands down, but he left the door open. Big Ramy has the thickness and the side leg, while William looks like a shorter but fuller version of Dorian Yates here. I would have Phil in first, William in second and Big Ramy in third, but remember, anyone can be first or a third in this pose, it's that closely contested. Abs and thighs is next, and it was William's turn to sit in the middle, which made Phil a bit less concerned because William didn't seem like a threat for the title that year, as Ramy was. William Bonac should always be last in this pose with this execution, where he basically hides his abs with his hand. It's crazy. But when you look at Phil's midsection, you wonder why Phil didn't do the same, because his midsection is even worse than William's. Big Ramy is the winner of the pose by definition. He simply doesn't have competition here. I would have William in second and Phil last again, just like in the other two front poses. Most muscular pose and pound for pound, Phil is definitely the most muscular guy on this stage. The amount of fullness and roundness he had in 2017 is just crazy. If his midsection looked good at this show, this physique would have competed with 03 Ronnie for the best ever in my opinion, but Phil's midsection in 2017 looked worse than Ronnie's ever looked. Anyway, luckily for Phil, the most muscular can be executed such that the midsection is not fully visible, which means that he looks great. Now, Big Ramy is bigger overall and William is very compact and complete, but I would still have Phil in first and then a toss-up between the other two, with Big Ramy getting the edge because of the extra mass. As a conclusion, I do agree with William finishing third here, despite being at his best ever. Phil and Big Ramy were just as good, and they had better genetics than William. The only case for William to finish higher is if we relegate Phil to third because of the midsection, which brings me to the top two. If we're doing this pose by pose, Phil wins more poses than Big Ramy. However, if you consider Phil's midsection issue a quote-unquote disqualifying factor, then Big Ramy was the deserving winner of the 2017 Mr. Olympia. Phil was lucky that aside from the midsection, he was at his absolute best this year. He was probably at his biggest bone dry condition. His back looked the best in his entire career. His hamstrings were the best ever here. His arms were full and detailed as always. Everything else was just on point, which prompted the judges to award him the win, despite the ugly midsection in my opinion. And I think I can agree with that, especially since he wasn't forgiven the following year when he suffered from the same issue. I think the judges were fair in how they treated this case.